Everyone in the corporate tower knew the 12th floor is the executive level. Expensive artwork lined the walls, polished marble reflected the ceiling lights, and every employee walked a little faster whenever a senior executive passed by. It was the last place anyone expected to see an ordinary-looking single dad sitting quietly on a maintenance bench with a toolbox beside him. His name was Daniel Carter. Most people assumed he was just another building technician filling in for the day. His blue work shirt carried no impressive title, and his worn boots certainly didn't match the luxury offices surrounding him. Employees passed him without a second glance. Some barely acknowledged him at all. Daniel didn't seem to mind. He focused on repairing a communication panel near the executive conference room while occasionally checking his old wristwatch. Every movement was calm, practiced, and precise, as if he had performed difficult tasks under pressure many times before. As lunchtime approached, the hallway became crowded. Executives, assistants, and visiting investors moved from meeting to meeting. A few people complained that the maintenance work was taking too long. One executive even muttered that building management should schedule repairs after business hours instead of letting maintenance guys get in everyone's way. Daniel simply smiled politely and continued working. What nobody knew was that before becoming a single father, Daniel had spent years serving his country in one of the military's most demanding aviation units. He had walked away from that life after losing his wife, choosing instead to raise his young daughter in peace. He never spoke about his past because, to him, being a father mattered far more than wearing medals. As he secured the final panel, a distant rumble echoed through the city. Several people walked toward the windows, surprised to hear military aircraft flying unusually low. Curious conversations spread across the executive floor as the powerful sound grew louder with every passing second. Daniel looked outside only once. The moment he saw the formation approaching in the distance, his calm expression changed ever so slightly. His eyes recognized something no one else noticed, a specific flight pattern that meant the pilots were preparing for a ceremonial pass over the city. He quietly stood up, brushed the dust from his hands, and stepped toward the window. The executives barely noticed him. Within seconds, the roar of jet engines filled the sky, and everyone rushed to the glass to watch the approaching aircraft. None of them realized that the quiet single dad standing among them was about to do something that would leave an entire building speechless. The sleek fighters emerged from the clouds in perfect formation, their silver-gray bodies flashing in the afternoon sunlight. Every conversation on the 12th floor came to an abrupt stop as the thunder of powerful engines rolled across the city. Employees pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, raising their phones to capture the rare sight. Daniel stood a few steps behind them, watching silently. To everyone else, the aircraft were simply part of a military demonstration. To Daniel, every movement told a story. He noticed the spacing between the jets, the precise altitude, and the subtle wing adjustments that only experienced aviators would recognize. His eyes followed the lead aircraft with quiet familiarity. A young executive laughed when he noticed Daniel watching. "Pretty impressive, isn't it?" he said with a smirk. "I guess you've never seen anything like this from a maintenance job." Several people chuckled. Daniel didn't argue. He simply nodded and kept looking through the glass. The formation drew closer. Suddenly, Daniel noticed something unusual. The lead aircraft was preparing for a ceremonial acknowledgement toward a nearby government complex where several retired military leaders had gathered for a special dedication event. Without saying a word, Daniel stepped closer to the window. He slowly raised one hand and made a brief sequence of deliberate signals, simple movements that looked meaningless to everyone around him but carried a very specific meaning in military aviation tradition. A woman standing nearby frowned. "What is he doing?" Another executive laughed. "Maybe he thinks the pilots can actually see him from up there." More laughter filled the hallway. Daniel lowered his hand and calmly folded his arms. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the impossible unfolded. The lead fighter gently rocked its wings. A second later, the remaining aircraft repeated the same motion in perfect sequence before continuing their flight path. The hallway fell completely silent. One employee lowered his phone. Another whispered, Did they just acknowledge him?" No one answered. Then, as the formation passed over the government complex, the pilots executed a flawless ceremonial salute toward a decorated general standing below. The timing was so exact that it matched Daniel's signal almost perfectly. The executives exchanged confused glances. The maintenance worker they had ignored moments earlier now stood quietly beside the window as though nothing unusual had happened. But several people were staring at him differently now. For the first time that day, they began to wonder who Daniel Carter really was. And why military pilots seemed to recognize something about him that no one else's. Silence lingered across the executive floor long after the fighters disappeared beyond the skyline. The employees who had laughed only moments earlier now looked at Daniel with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. No one seemed willing to break the silence. Finally, the young executive who had mocked him cleared his throat. That was just a coincidence, right? Daniel gave a small smile as he picked up his toolbox. Maybe, he replied calmly. Before anyone could ask another question, the elevator doors opened. 2 uniformed military officers stepped onto the 12th floor, followed by the building's head of security. Their polished uniforms immediately caught everyone's attention. The officers looked around the hallway for only a moment before one of them spoke. "Excuse me, we're looking for Mr. Daniel Carter." Every eye turned toward the quiet maintenance worker. Daniel raised his hand politely. "I'm Daniel." The senior officer walked straight toward him, stopped at attention, and delivered a crisp military salute. His partner did the same without hesitation. The entire hallway froze. Even the executives who rarely stood for anyone watched in stunned silence as the officers greeted the man they had ignored all morning. "Sir," the senior officer said respectfully, "General Harrison asked us to thank you personally. He recognized your signal immediately. He said it has been many years since he last saw it." Daniel looked slightly embarrassed. "Please tell the general it was an honor to see today's ceremony." The officer smiled. "He also said you never liked being the center of attention." A few employees exchanged shocked glances. The maintenance worker apparently knew a general well enough to receive a personal message. One executive finally found the courage to ask, "Who exactly are you?" Daniel paused for a moment before answering. "I'm just a father trying to make an honest living." The officers smiled, knowing there was far more to his story than he was willing to tell. As they left, the head of security quietly whispered to one of the executives, "Do you know who he really is? Years ago, he served in one of the military's most elite aviation support units. His work helped protect countless pilots during dangerous missions. The general has never forgotten him." The executive who had mocked Daniel earlier lowered his head in embarrassment. Daniel simply lifted his toolbox, thanked everyone for their patience during the repairs, and walked toward the elevator. No arrogance, no speech, no demand for recognition. The doors closed behind him, leaving the entire executive floor standing in thoughtful silence. Only then did they realize that true greatness rarely announces itself. Sometimes it wears worn work boots, carries an old toolbox, and quietly walks away before anyone fully understands the extraordinary life hidden behind an ordinary smile could see.